Well, good evening and welcome to a CAS chat live around Project Quantum and Assessing Computing. One of us in the room is listening on speakers and that's pinging back audio. So whoever that is, if you'd like to mute your microphone when you're not actually talking, that's going to be easier for other people. But do turn your microphone on when you are talking. That's fine too. Okay, so a little bit of background first. Project Quantum is this lovely idea about developing a national item bank for assessing computing. This is something that's talked about in the Macintosh report about assessment after levels. And Macintosh and colleagues make a good argument that the best way, or one of the most effective ways of assessing what a child has learned is, believe it or not, to ask them some questions about that. But what are good questions to ask? Over in the realm of English and mathematics education, we have things like SAPS questions, and I suppose we've got at a higher level GCSE questions and so on that we can fall back on. Below GCSE level, over here in the foundation subjects, there's very little available that we can use. So the cunning plan is let's knit something together as a community here about the questions that we can use with our learners. Now, I know there's plenty of other ways of assessing computing, but up in secondary, at any rate, there's also lots and lots of teachers who are writing questions that they can use with their classes, that they do use with their classes. So the notion for Project Quantum is let's share those with one another. Let's do that on some sort of platform which takes all of the heavy lifting out of making that accessible to learners. And then let's start to see what the data says about from these questions. As more and more learners have a go at these things, where are the common misconceptions? What are the things where actually we seem to be doing pretty well? What are the things where actually it's worth us stepping back a little and thinking, how might we teach this better? There's also, of course, lots of cool and exciting things about what makes for a good question and how do we know that's a good question. We've got some cool people working on the project. So we've got Simon Peyton-Jones from Computing at Schools leading the work from our side of that. We've also got Robert Coe from the Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring up at Durham, and Tim Oates, who was on the original panel about reviewing the national curriculum from Cambridge Assessment, as well as the team from Diagnostic Questions, who have this great web platform. That's probably enough from me by way of introductions. Quickly round the room, who else is here in the live chat, please?
My microphone. Cynthia's here.
Hello, Cynthia.
Hello.
Do you want to just quick one sentence bit biography?
Bit biography. I'm a teacher trainer at the University of Southampton, and I've been contributing to the Quantum group by running some background on how to write multiple choice questions.
That's cool. Right. Neil, your microphone's on.
Okay, good evening. I'm Neil Rickus. I'm very soon going to be a senior lecturer in computing education at the University of Hertfordshire, and I currently teach 3 days a week in addition to teaching on Brunel and lead PGCE and a bit of independent consulting and whatever else computing-wise, particularly in primary, comes my way.
That's very good. Okay, and I think it's Craig. Your microphone's on as well.
Hiya, I'm Craig Barton. I feel a bit of a fraud here. I'm normally involved in maths chat, so I'm cheating on them a bit tonight, involved in CAS chat. I hope they'll take me back next week. But I'm a maths teacher from the northwest of England in Bolton. I'm the creator of MrBartonMaths.com and the co-founder of Diagnostic Questions.com. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you very much for joining us. And Simon and David, do you want to turn your microphones on and introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Simon. I'm the other co-founder from Diagnostic Questions. I'm a programmer, but I have to say the workshops have shown my ignorance in the computing curriculum, so it's been a very humbling experience for me so far. So I've very enjoyed it.
That's great. And finally, David.
Hi, I'm David. I work at a school in Norfolk as a computer science teacher and as the leader of technical education there. And I got involved through the workshops as a teacher, wanting to kind of better assess where my students are at and sort of help them make more progress.
That's great. Thank you for joining us this evening. I should also introduce Sophie, who's with me here, and it's past your bedtime, young lady, isn't it? Do you want to say anything to our audience?
I love you.
Oh, bless you, darling. Cynthia, I think I ought to hand over to you now to get us underway with some ideas on what makes for a good multiple choice question and how to write one.
Thank you, Miles. I'm just going to share with you a presentation that I have put together with some tips on how to do this. This resource is available on the Computing at Schools in the resource area, and I assume that Miles will put together some links or something when we're finished this evening, so you'll be able to find all of this information. So as background, the Computing at Schools ran some working groups on assessments, and what's in this presentation is not my work, it's their contributions. All of us together came up with a set of rules to help people write multiple choice questions. And this is, I'm going to show you what we found out and hopefully walk you through a practical exercise so that you'll feel empowered to go away and write your own questions. Okay? So for those of you who want the quick, short, choppy bullet points, here's the top tips. You need, for a good multiple choice question, you need 4 or 5 responses. The diagnostic question system, of course, uses and requires 4, well, up to 4 responses, and 4 is ideal. We need 1 correct response, and there has to only be 1, and it really must be correct. No iffy ones or vague ones. To get the best feedback about what the learners know, you need to try to make distractors that are plausible, which means they're believable, and that if you can, try to tie them into something that's a common misconception that you see in your own learners, or a type of common procedural errors if it's a procedural type question. It's best to try to avoid none of the above or all of the above, because by that it actually means if one of the questions can be ruled out, it's much easier to guess, and they have a very clear context for the question. This is actually really harder than it sounds, but what you want to do is include enough information that the learner can answer the question, but no more than that. Okay, so if anybody has questions, you know you can stop me as well, all right? So top tips. Then some other things that you might want to keep in mind as well are about your audience, and that is if you are actually asking a question that's aimed at a primary learner, to be sure to make sure that the language that you use is in the program of study for primary. If you're actually aiming it at a Key Stage 4 learner, then you have a different set of terminology that you use, so tailor the question. You can also think about how you ask a question. Rather than asking a question, give a command word at the beginning. You'll often see these kind of questions formed in this way on standardized assessments or awarding body exams, where you'll often see questions such begin with a word such as discuss or evaluate or identify. So rather than to ask an outright question, give a command of what the learner is supposed to do. Again, another thing has to do with the context, and try not to add too much in. A, it adds a lot of reading, and B, it also distracts. And one of my favorites is the use of images. Please, please, please try to use images to support the context. The Diagnostic Question platform supports the use of images, and they're very effective in helping set the context for a question. Okay, are we okay now? Okay, we'll go on. This, one of the things that came out of the working group as well was the fact that while when we write questions, we tend to put in all the information that we think someone needs to answer the question, and we often forget that the learners actually might not even be able to access the question, even though they may actually know the material. So keep sentences short, keep the points very separate, use short sentences and not join them with a lot of ands, make it active rather than passive, and where possible avoid words that have duplicate meanings or might introduce error. Very common sense, really. Yeah. Now this is the opposite hand. What should we try to avoid? We should avoid vague terms like this. I've given an example there of one about a star network, so rather than say this, just repeat the words that are meaningful. Try to use command words instead of questions with question marks at the end. Avoid none of the above. And this one was really interesting because some of I never thought much about this when I was writing questions, I think, but avoid references to things such as religion, war, countries, family organization, genders, animals. Yes, because some people, you may cause offense. So there's a tip later in the slides that can help you avoid these kind of issues. Okay.
I hope when you say that avoid references to animals, we're allowed to mention beavers. Otherwise, we're going to lose a lot of our computational thinking questions, Cynthia.
Yes. Okay. I'll have to amend that slide and to say with the exception of the Bebrus beaver.
Okay, because of course, for those who don't know, many of the Bebrus questions have this sort of family of beavers as their focus, for no good reason as far as I can see, but perhaps you know differently.
No, I certainly don't, but I'll have to amend that. I can put a little picture of them.
Okay, moving on.
Yeah, moving on. So when you talk to people about multiple choice questions, especially people who are more expert in it than I am, who have used them for many years in higher education, they're quite focused on being able to reduce the guessing, reduce being able to guess the right answer. And they've come up with lots and lots of rules about how to reduce the probability that a guess will get you a correct mark. But rather than go all the way down that alley, the assessment working group just said, let's just be sensible. Let's try to make them all grammatically parallel and try to make all the options of similar length so that it's obvious that one is not either correct or incorrect. So just make them look the same and appear grammatically similar. Okay? Then we tried to, it was really an interesting experience watching people try to develop questions live in the assessment working group, and we decided that one way to approach it was to try to do it a step by step, and I've got an example for you. So if we write a question, what we tried to do was write down what you want to assess and write down what you think the distractors are going to catch. Then think about the assumptions. So step back from the problem and try to analyze your own thinking and think, what assumptions am I making about that question, and what might my readers assume about that question. Then go to the next step and make a set of tags which fit the taxonomy that's been being used on diagnostic questions, and then trial the question with some or your colleagues. It's really helpful to get feedback on questions that you've done. I've been very lucky in that I've had some colleagues give me feedback on the questions, and it actually really does make for a better question. Okay.
And it's interesting that we've got our quantum content Google list there, where we've got some really interesting conversations around the content of a question and how a question should be tagged. And I think our hope is that we're going to be able to bring some of that conversation into the Diagnostic Questions platform alongside the questions, I think.
Ideal. And again, some of those colleagues have helped me learn how to write their questions. So we're all learned together. So based on this little step-by-step guide, I want to show you one of the questions that I made. Now, it's not a perfect question, but it was sort of like my journey of writing a question, and I've shared this with everyone who wants to, who's happy to listen to me. I'll tell them about it. So I want to. This is just a little example that followed the little suggestion of the step-by-step guide. So the first thing is I identified what I wanted to assess, and one of the things I wanted to assess was, did my students understand the concept of overflow? Now, having been in the classroom, I was able to identify the items, misconceptions in my learners' heads that I thought would make good distractors, and I chose 3. One being that there's an extra digit that's actually stored somewhere in the computer. We don't know where that place is. At least my learners don't know what to call it. That happens when there's an overflow. Some of them always seem to answer the questions about overflow. Well, it's bigger than 255. So unfortunately, that came from the specification. So they've learned to answer the question the way the specification instructed them to, and then some of them have missed the connection between the size of the inputs and the size of the result. So I had an idea for a question, and I thought, well, I know 3 things that my learners do when they miss this, they misunderstand this concept. So then I went to on to the step 2, which was actually try to develop a question. So you could say I was being a bit sneaky here, but I've chosen to use 7 bits because that's out of the ordinary for them, because they're used to using 8 bits. So I decided I'd write a question to do some addition and ask them to add 2 binary numbers, and then I wrote the correct answer and then the 3 responses. So remember I said I wanted one response to be to catch their answer of, well, the answer is it's always bigger than 255. So I've made a distractor that should catch that. So I just put it in a table so that I have my distractors, the response that I'm going to put on the screen, and then what I think the distractors are going to catch. So that was just an easy way for me, I felt, for me to lay it out. So you can see how it's going to turn into a multiple choice question already. Okay. So then for step 3, I wrote the question as I wanted it to appear on the screen, which is the first bullet point. The binary addition causes an overflow. Identify the reason for the overflow error, and then I popped in my correct answer and my distractors. And then this is the second edit. If you look at the second bullet point, you will see what I started with. I started in the original. I used the symbol greater than instead of is bigger, which after thinking about it is actually asking them to interpret a different symbol as well as answer the question. In the original, I used the word top bit in response B instead of the left bit, and you can see why that might be confusing, because is the top bit the right or is the top bit the left? And in the original, I used, in option D, I used the words too large instead of too big. So I was just trying to lower the literacy challenge a bit. Okay, so that was my first attempt, and then when I stopped to read the question and see the assumptions I was making, I found some of those as well. Then in the last thing I did was finally make the question as I wanted it to appear, and then chose the tags that I wanted. So in the diagnostic question taxonomy, that comes under data representation. Okay. So how does it, any questions so far? No, it sounds sorry, Miles.
The only thing I query about this question is, do you need to be explicit that this is working in a 7-bit register, or is that implicit by the length of those the binary numbers there?
So implicit in that the binary number should fill a register.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's an interesting point, because that could be something that would make a really nice another question. Yeah, because on machines, the numbers should fill the whole register, which is why we pad with zeros.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 0 at the beginning of the second number there is giving a sufficient clue to the person taking the question that this is a 7-bit register.
I hope so.
Yeah, okay.
But interestingly enough, I don't know that, I can't say that that's how everybody sees a question. So perhaps that's something that somebody else might give me some feedback on later. Yeah.
It would be interesting to see. Is this question on the platform, Cynthia?
I don't. It could very well be.
Okay.
I can't remember whether I've put this one up there or not. Yeah.
Because that's the lovely thing about Project Quantum, that it's not, writing the questions. We're also going to get what happens when enough learners have a go at these things and see whether they find this something that they can reliably answer given their relative ability levels. Okay. Yeah. Anybody else with questions at this point, or shall we wait until Cynthia gets to the end of her slides?
Oh, I don't want to take up all your time. I have one other example if you want to see it.
Yeah, I'm happy to carry on.
Okay, I'll do this one. This one could be a bit quicker. So this one was about the difference between fixed count loops and conditional loops. Okay, so my learners tend to miss the fact that the bounds can affect the loop, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. They miss sometimes that some loops have to execute at least once just because of the way they're written, and they also think that you can only loop by incrementing once. So I tried to come up with a question that would help them concentrate on how looping works. So I chose several different programming languages to try this in, and I think this question is on Diagnostic Questions, the platform. So, but I did pick languages that had both fixed count and conditional loops, and I thought, well, we'll make it simple and have the question be about identifying which loop actually repeats 5 times. And I must say, this was harder than I thought it was going to be. Just coming up with 3 distractors. So as you can see, I put it in a table again. So that the top one, which is oh, that's a bit of Python, isn't it? So miss the fact that someone can type in any number between 0 and 5, and it will control the loop. So that one, we have no way of knowing whether it will go around 5 times or not. Sometimes they miss the bit about the loop having to execute once, because this is a repeat loop, so it has to execute at least once, no matter what the count is at the bottom, but count going in is already 5, so it is only ever going to execute once. And then some of them miss the fact that you can increment by more than 1, so this has a count of 2, so it effectively will not execute 5 times. And of course the bottom one is correct. So I've chosen to do a bit of Python, and there's some pseudocode as well. So then the next step after that was to think about the assumptions. Sometimes languages you don't actually need a count, a variable. You can do it in lots of different ways, but I've tried to use the same technique in all the languages. I used the word repetition, I think, in the beginning when I first wrote the question, and then I thought, well, although I realized that students should understand the word repetition, in order to lower the literacy demands, I just changed it to loop. And then the only thing that I was concerned about with this question was that because I put 2 2 Python examples, that's A and D, that they may decide, if they've only ever seen Python, they might automatically think AD is one of the right answers, and thereby have a 50-50 guess. But I haven't thought more about what to do about that just yet. But anyway, I think it's a nice question. Not perfect. So the question becomes, programming languages have both fixed count and condition control loops. Identify the loop that goes around 5 times, and I've kept repetition, iteration, and loops. And that would be under programming on the Diagnostic Questions taxonomy. And this is what the question looked like when it was actually finished and on the system. So I used images for the code and put the question over on the side and put in the little text labels. So that's my story of how I wrote a question based on the advice that was gathered during the assessment working group sessions. I'm happy to take questions, or if you'd like to give me some feedback on my questions, I'm all for that as well.
Cynthia, thank you so much for walking us through that. That's really interesting. Questions from the people in the room here? Just go ahead, Neil, please.
With the last example we've just shown, I think if a child was attempting to answer that, they might perhaps think, oh, this is a way of writing these instructions that I haven't seen before. Actually, it could perhaps be the way it's done in this language. I think that could be a little bit confusing. So I think perhaps if it was all in Python or all in code or all in something else, that would, I think, well, I personally think that would be a nicer way to assess it. I think there's probably quite a few different challenges that the person answering this question would have to overcome.
I do agree with you there. That was one of the things I was quite worried about when I thought about how to go about this question. And one of the things is, of course, that Python doesn't have a repeat until loop, does it? So
Yeah.
I couldn't quite see a way around that either. But it doesn't mean that the question couldn't be changed so that it could all use one language or could all use pseudocode. But yes, I agree, I take that on board. That certainly mixing the languages makes it much more challenging, doesn't it?
I think it increases the cognitive load and doesn't necessarily get at this testing about the count idea that you're trying to. But it would be interesting to see the data on this. It really would. There are people who know about this stuff probably in the room here, but am I right in thinking that you can do a while true and break loop in Python to mirror what a repeat?
There's ways around it.
Okay, is that a way around it?
It's a way of doing it within Python, because as Cynthia says, Python lacks the traditional for loop. And therefore, Python-esque code is the use of requires that use of a while true loop and then an exit condition.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. It wasn't a stupid thing to say. I'm relieved. Any other questions or comments or feedback on Cynthia's presentation there?
Well, I took part in one of the workshops that Cynthia was at, and it was quite interesting for us in terms of this whole sort of thing of the distractors not just being obviously wrong answers, but answers that really teased out a specific misunderstanding, which to me was what made MCQs, multiple choice questions, so much more powerful. That when you look at some of the best questions, it is those ones where you immediately know, oh right, that student was thinking that when they were answering that question. And therefore you can use it immediately to diagnose what it is you need to teach or reteach.
Thank you, David. Anybody else? Okay, in which case, Craig, would you like to walk us through the sort of how to actually get one of these questions onto the Diagnostic Questions platform?
Of course, I'll have a go. Can you hear me all right? Is that coming through loud and clear?
Seems to be.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, hello everybody. I'll just talk you through firstly how to get a question up on there. Then I'll just show you some of the data that you can get back, and then just look at some of the ways that the data can pull out key misconceptions. And I think just want to pick up on one of the points that you were discussing there. Nothing provokes discussions more than teachers writing questions and showing questions to each other. And one thing we do in our maths department is every week we write a question together. We pick a topic that's coming up, say it's fractions or something like that, and we each write a question on fractions and then debate what misconception each answer reveals and so on. And for kind of focusing pedagogy, certainly in mathematics, and I think it crosses across other subjects, writing these multiple choice questions together I think is a really good kind of pedagogical teacher development thing. So I just thought I'd chuck that in the mix. But I'll show you this now.
That's such a good idea, and something we definitely ought to be doing over here in computing.
And the thing is as well, whilst I'm on a roll, I might as well just say this other one as well, that what's nice about it as well is it teachers of different levels of experience and technological expertise and so on can all benefit from it. So we have NQTs paired up with teachers who've been teaching for 20 or 30 years and sharing their experience for what mistakes and misconceptions kids have had. And it's a real good way of bringing the department together, is writing multiple choice questions together. So I'd strongly advise trying it for any teachers who are listening. Anyway, I'll shut up now about that, and I'll just show you this. So there's the website, diagnosticquestions.com, and I'll just talk you through once you've logged in, and everything I'm going to show you is completely free here, how to upload a question. So I'm just on the questions page here. Now I write all of my questions in PowerPoint and then I save them as an image in PowerPoint, and that's very easy to do in PowerPoint. Just save as JPEG and it just captures it as a nice image. So I've created a question in PowerPoint on indices, a classic maths topic, and I'm just going to put it on the website now and hopefully show you how straightforward it is. So I've clicked create a question, and this gives me a nice blank canvas here, and I'm just going to click here on insert image. Now we're going to make this process as slick as possible as we can over the next few months, but hopefully it's fairly straightforward here. My computer, I've saved it, and I've called it something exciting like Powers question there. So let me click open, and it appears there, and I'm just going to add it to the canvas. And this is a little maths question that I just wrote just before we came on air here. 100 to the power of 3, what does this equal? And as the computer colleagues were talking about, there's one right answer, and then the 3 answers have been chosen to reveal specific misconceptions that kids have. So once you upload a question, you are required to do 2 things. Firstly, you've got to tag it with the right answer, and if my maths is right, 100 to the power 3 is 1,000,000. And I've just checked that on a calculator, so that'd be embarrassing if I got a maths question wrong at this stage. And then I've just got to tag it in the right area of the curriculum.
Of course, Craig, to us in here, it looks as though the question is something about 4 to the power of 3.
Ah, nice. Bit of binary. I like it. Good. Nice. Cross-curricular. So now I'm going to tag it in the curriculum. So I go for maths, a bit of number, and it's indices, powers and roots, and squares and cubes. So we tag it. We have a main kind of a main subject with maths, and in your case computer science, and then we have a next level down, a next level down, and a next level down in maths. And I think we have one fewer than that in computer science at the moment. And then once you're good to go, you just click create, and that is it, done and dusted. You don't need to do anything else. That's it now, officially on the site. And depending on your internet connection, it'll take a couple of seconds, but there it is there, and that's ready for the world to answer. You can then build that into your own quiz. You can just add it to a quiz with a load of other questions and create yourself a quiz to set to your students, and that's a very quick process, and hopefully that's pretty intuitive on the website. But I just wanted to show you, once you've got your question on there, what it looks like when kids answer it, because often, as was kind of touched upon in the excellent demonstration just before, you don't know how good a question is or how good the distractors are until kids have actually answered it themselves. So if I just look at some results from a quiz that I set for my Year 11s earlier on in the year, this was a 12-question quiz, and that's just a quick summary of their responses. And immediately I can see that question 3 has caused problems and question 9 has caused problems. So if I just have a look at what those questions were, question 3 here was another indices question. Now each of these dots represents one of my students, and the thing about diagnostic questions is once they give an answer, they're prompted to give an explanation for that answer. Now if the question's been designed nicely, you can often tell the misconception without reading the explanation, but it often, if the kids have been encouraged to write explanations, it really gives you a sense of the depth of their misconception and the specific nature of it. And likewise, if kids have got it right, it's only by reading their explanation that you get a sense of whether they've got it right by guessing, which is a kind of problem with multiple choice questions, or whether they've really got that depth of understanding. So there's a way of really quickly but in-depth analysis of kids' results. And if I scroll down to the bottom of this page, and as I say, this is all completely free, you also get your classic kind of question level analysis, and as you hover over each of those, you get the explanations that the kids have given and a little summary of their answers. So that's a kind of quick summary of any quiz that students do on diagnostic questions. But the other thing that I thought you might find interesting is obviously that's just my kids, but certainly the maths questions.
Craig,
of course,
please do. How do we get a quiz to a particular group of learners?
Okay, yeah, that's really straightforward. It's an excellent question. So if I show you, let me go here. So if I show you the quiz page, so let's assume that you've put a quiz together, and putting a quiz together is literally as simple as clicking each of the questions and putting create a quiz. So let's just assume you've put a quiz together. It then appears on this quiz page, which is just next to the questions page, and it's simply a case of clicking assign to class, and it will ask you, it'll give you a drop-down menu of all your classes that you've got registered, and I'll show you how to set up a class just at the end. You click on it, you tell them when it starts, you tell them when it finishes, you click create, and then when they log in, that quiz will appear straight in front of them. So hopefully that'll be pretty straightforward for people.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And then the other thing I just wanted to show you is, obviously it's not just your students answering these questions, it's students all around the world, and some of our most popular questions have now been answered 50,000 times, so it really gives us some incredible insight. So this is our kind of data analytics page. And what I've done here is I've just taken algebra, a top-level subject for maths, and that's the whole world's understanding of algebra on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, this is just 14 to 16-year-old students in the United Kingdom. And each one of these areas represents a different kind of sub-level. So the centre one's algebra, then if we go out, we've got solving equations, and we've got linear equations, and so on. So I can go in and I can go out. But what's really nice is it shows me the top 5 weak areas and the top 5 strengths within that particular subject, and then as I scroll down it shows me the worst performing questions in that subject. So what I can do there is I can get a real good sense before I teach a lesson of the misconceptions that kids have before I go into the classroom. And if I want some data behind that, some explanations behind that, all I need to do is, for example, let's pick one down here, click on explanations, and that will take me to a little page that shows me how the whole world has explained each of these questions. So I get to read all the different explanations that kids have given. So I think that's a really powerful page that once your questions get used quite a lot, you can do some really interesting comparisons. Girls versus boys, 14-year-olds versus 15-year-olds, kids in the UK versus kids in the US, and I think there'd be some fascinating data, certainly for a data geek like myself, coming out of that one. And yeah, the final thing I'll show you, then I'll just shut up, is just how easy it is just to get people set up on this. So if you've built a quiz and you want to get your kids on there, all you need to do is go onto the Add Class page, come up with a name for your class, whatever you want to call it. We have 10A, 1A, all that kind of stuff. These are all our kids, all our classes in our school. And that creates you a blank class, and each class has an invite students thing next to it. And if you click on that, it generates a class code, and when kids register on the site, they simply type in their class code, and that's then immediately in your class. So any quiz that you assign to your class will immediately get given to those kids in the class, if that makes sense. And that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of how you upload a question, how you put a quiz together, assign it to your kids, but I think most importantly of all, how you then read the data back, and it gives you data on a class level basis. But then the real interesting stuff for me is looking globally at the misconceptions. So hope that makes sense, and if anybody's got any questions, please give me a shout.
Craig, that's fabulous. Can you just confirm that business of setting up a class and assigning a quiz to a class is part of the free offering.
Oh, every single thing you've seen there is 100% free. I'm not a dodgy salesman, I promise you.
Bait and switch. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay,
my pleasure.
Questions from those of us here. Neil, go ahead.
Craig, is there a way if you see a question related to a topic that is wrong that you can actually flag it as incorrect or doesn't test the area of knowledge specified, for example?
Yeah, excellent question. And part of my daily routine is I every morning about 7:30 I check the moderating queue for questions that have been flagged. So yeah, if you're a teacher and you see a question that's either incorrect or is inappropriate or exactly as you say doesn't quite test that it should do, either it's been tagged incorrectly, each question has a little flag button next to it, and when you click the flag, it'll prompt you to give a reason for why you're flagging it up, and then that comes through to me, and every morning I either read through them, and what I'm hoping to do, obviously I only kind of specialise at the maths ones, or if there's like an inappropriate other question, I can pick up on that, but hopefully we'll get some subject experts who will know more about the other things. But what I tend to do, if it's a computer science question or a science question, I just it automatically tells the author why their question's been flagged up and offers them a chance to make an edit themselves before it gets remoderated, if that makes sense. But yeah, we're very aware that this system relies on good quality questions. If we're hoping to make some conclusions about insights from it, the questions need to be of the highest quality. So yeah, moderation is very important to us.
Simon, I will do one of those now for you.
Oh, nice one. Thank you.
Simon set 3 or 4 of us up as moderators for the computer science quest, or the computer questions,
fantastic, superb, brilliant.
Okay. Other questions from folks here? Everybody's got their microphones muted, so if you are talking, we can't hear you. Okay. David, you said on the Google form you wanted to share some of your work with multiple choice questions and Project Quantum so far. Your microphone is muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I've been trying to, because I've had to switch the iPad, I can't actually show you what I've been doing, sadly, but what I can talk about is that as part of testing the stuff out with my students, I've been using Google Forms to kind of get my students to have a go at some questions and then to see what they've been, because it's just been the quickest way of doing it, to see what sort of ideas they've been coming up with and what they've been thinking about. So that's just sort of the stuff I was doing. So I was hoping I'd be able to show you some of the quizzes I've done, sadly, but I'm happy to switch the iPad. Unfortunately, I can't get that up on the screen for you. But that's been quite interesting because it has been, what I've found with the students is they've really liked the fact that it's they've been able to get almost very rapid feedback on what's gone well and what they've misunderstood, and I've kind of used it at the start of a lesson often as a way of refactoring and recasting my teaching. That if the students have if all my students have got a particular idea wrong, then I know that what I taught last lesson, I made a mistake or I didn't quite get a misconception dealt with, and that's been quite an interesting thing because it's meant that my lessons have become much more responsive to what the students really aren't understanding, so I can then move on and not deal with those things that they've actually already got. So that's been quite a useful way, and the plan is that once I've got sort of a few questions that are kind of refined and really do tease out those misdiagnoses and those misconceptions, that I'll start uploading them onto the Diagnostic Questions platform.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a number of questions which have been posted in from the viewers of this chat. So let's start with John Wick's question. John asks if we think it would be better if all of the questions were in pseudocode. I assume he's thinking of something like haggis there, which, although it's very tasty, we shouldn't ever ask how it's been made.
I think he might be talking about like, for example, the OCR exam board now has got a specific pseudocode that they recommend. So I guess questions could be written specifically in the OCR pseudocode, which would be quite good.
Oh, Oh, I've lost Miles. There we go, Miles. So yeah, I think that is what he was talking about. But I think we'll have to be careful because each of the awarding bodies have their own sort of little style of pseudocode. And while Haggis seems to be, or something based on Haggis is seemingly becoming very popular, other versions do exist. So we might. I imagine that all students would be able to read the different pseudocodes if they just stopped and had a look at them and just didn't get panicked. But then again, there's something quite nice about seeing some code that you're familiar with sometime.
Ideally, we'll have enough questions in there that it doesn't really matter which language they're written in. And there is some opportunity, I'm sure, to take a question that's been written in Haggis and redo it as a question written in Python, and then those who are assembling quizzes can take a pseudocode version or a Python version. I'd be very reluctant to say all programming questions have to be in a particular language, whether that's Haggis or whether that's Python or whether that's, I don't know, something like Visual Basic, heaven forbid.
But that would be quite nice because you could take one question and you could put it in whatever languages are most popular these days. You could certainly have a version in pseudocode, and you could have another version in Python, and you could maybe VB.NET, whatever other language logo, or even Scratch, I suppose. You could have the same question 4 or 5 different ways.
Other thoughts on that? Okay.
I think that's quite a good point to make in terms of having different languages, because it teases out the specific misconception in a particular language. So that if you've got sort of students that you're teaching in, say, VB.NET, you could make sure that they're actually understanding that kind of difference between sort of, as Cynthia was talking about, loops that execute once, like a while loop may not execute at all, whereas a repeat until loop will execute once, a for loop will execute whatever number of times, and also the stepping. And that's a really important thing to tease out in different languages. And I think that's an important point to make, that having that variety of languages out there so that it's not constraining to one thing. Because I think sometimes some teachers feel that, oh, I must teach Python or I must teach this because everyone else is doing it, rather than going down a route that actually best suits the students in front of them.
Okay, that I think takes us on to a question from Pete Kemp, who asks about the licensing of the questions, because if the questions are licensed under a liberal license, you could take a question that's been written in Visual Basic and redo it as a question in Python without worrying or having to seek permission. What is the licensing position for the questions that we're developing?
All the licenses are under Creative Commons share alike. If people wanted different forms of license, then do get in contact with the group and we can add some flexibility. To be honest, we just went for one license just so it was easier.
I think it's the by SA license, so it's attribution and then permission to redistribute in any format. Okay, which is great. Thank you very much for clarifying, Simon. That then takes us to another question from Pete, which is, can we export the questions in another format so that we could bring them into other platforms, such as Moodle or Socrative or anything which is not nearly as good as Diagnostic Questions?
As part of the project, we're committed to providing all questions in a digital form that can be exported and imported to any other platform. I mean, definitely the whole licensing is set up to support that as well. Have we actually done that yet? No. No, we haven't got around to it yet. We have been adding some support for moderation of questions and also the commenting on questions recently, but be assured that it is on the agenda. And if people have thoughts on what format they would want that to be in, that would be really helpful for us to know as well. Because Diagnostic Questions is before the Quantum project, we basically haven't dealt with interoperability of questions, and we haven't built it to be like that, so it will just require us to develop some support for that.
Thank you for that. A follow-up question from Pete in a separate chat window here. Wonders whether are we allowing commercial use of the questions?
Sorry, commercial use of the questions. What, selling of the questions?
Well, if I think it's down to the specific terms of the Creative Commons license. My understanding is that we're going with the default position is attribution and share alike as the license terms, which does allow other commercial organizations to reuse the questions.
Yeah, that's the license we've gone for. So your understanding is probably even better than mine. So somebody told me this is the license we should go for.
Okay. I think there may be some questions which we have to badge as non-commercial ones, but if the default position is indeed attribution share alike, then that allows commercial reuse. Okay. So I think, Pete, sorry, I'm just following different windows here. Pete, I think that means it would be all right unless people have specifically ticked a box to say using a different set of license terms. My understanding, do check, is that we're going for attribution and share alike as the license here. And let's move on into stuff which is not nearly as technical as all of that sort of Creative Commons licensing. John Woolard, who's one of the Quantum Content team, and unfortunately can't be with us this evening, asks a couple of questions about the Diagnostic Questions platform. So he wonders if we can have semi-automatically generated questions. So could you have something where there are placeholder variables in the question text that then at runtime are replaced by particular numbers? Or strings?
That would be a really good extension. And yes, I mean, definitely anything's possible. We don't do it at the moment. One of the priorities for the Quantum project is to support additional question types and more on the collaboration of creating questions. And one of those things could, bizarrely wasn't mentioned yesterday. We had a meeting yesterday with the Quantum team, and we came up with lots of different question types in that meeting, but that wasn't mentioned. So I think that's a really good idea. So I'll add that and share that with the team.
Okay. Thank you, Simon. A second question from John here. He wonders about whether we could have a survey question type. So that do we have to have a right answer to a question? Or is it possible to use the diagnostic questions to ask a question along the lines of, how confident do you feel about your understanding of abstraction? A is very confident, down to D is not confident at all.
Again, I think that's a really good idea, but we don't do it at the moment. So a couple of comments on that. Yesterday we did discuss the idea of surveying students' understanding in order to build up a kind of cohort of information that you could use to build better questions. So building questions is difficult. I think we've covered that. Building a good question with good distractors is difficult. And one idea that was discussed yesterday was coming up with a fairly open question with a long form response. So, for example, what do you know about osmosis? I know that's not confusing. And the students would fill in a paragraph of what they know about that, and from those paragraphs you'd be able to pull out different ideas about what the misconceptions might be that you're trying to identify and address, and then build a question based on that. So, so that was one thought. Obviously, what he's talking about is more, yeah. So, how do you feel about different subjects? I think that's a really nice idea to include. There is a company who does this separately, which is very, very good. So if there are any teachers out there interested in surveying their students on how they think and feel about their learning, there's a company called Edmodo. I don't mean Edmodo.
There is a company called Edmodo.
There is a company called Edmodo, but that isn't the one I meant.
Okay.
I've forgotten their name all of a sudden. I'm going to look them up, and I will tell you in 5 minutes. Okay.
Okay. Cool. We're getting pretty close to 9 o'clock, which is our cut-off time for this. So any last comments or feedback on what we've seen so far? Is this something which you'd want to use with your pupils if you're not already doing so? Go ahead, Neil.
You mentioned in the various email exchanges about tagging the age group of the pupils. Is that something that you do when you actually upload it in the first place?
I think as things stand, we're going for a fairly flat taxonomy of which bit of computing does this question relate to. There's plenty of opportunity to do some more work on that, but we needed to get something up and running reasonably quickly. The notion of tagging questions with intended audience, age phase, whatever, I think is going to be tremendously helpful for users of the system. Simon, is that something which we can easily incorporate?
We can definitely add different metadata. So yeah, it will be easy to extend. I think that's also part of the quantum discussions actually. So any other thoughts that you have around that, please do share them with Miles or Cynthia.
So we could have two orthogonal taxonomies, one around the subject matter of the question and another sitting at right angles to that about what age group this is intended for.
Yeah, yeah, we definitely could. We haven't done that for mathematics because, in fact, I mean, if Craig's still here, he's probably explain that better than me. But I know we discussed it many times, the math.
Yeah, I'm here. Should I go on my little rant, Simon, very quickly?
Go on.
Yes, please. Yes, you have 4 minutes.
I might need 40, but I'll try and cut it down. Yeah, the reason we don't do it for maths, it's one of our most requested features. Is purely because I've always been of the belief that a question designed for a Year 7 class, top set Year 7 class in maths, would be equally applicable to a bottom set Year 9 or a bottom set Year 11 or even a top set Year 11 just for using for a starter and so on. And I work, I'm the TES maths advisor, and it absolutely does my head in when somebody categorises a resource for a certain age group and that kind of precludes anyone from any other age group from thinking it's appropriate to them. So we kind of made that conscious kind of a little stand of mine. It's my one decision I got Simon allowed me to have, so I was pushed that through. But yeah, I think I'm going to have to bow to popular demand, and I like the idea of an intended age, and as long as there's a little disclaimer that people know that it could well be used with other age, useful to people, as I think it is, I'm more than happy to go with that one.
Craig, tell me, do you have much in terms of primary content for mathematics?
Yeah, we do. We have essentially we have everything from probably Key Stage 1. We probably don't go into early years. Probably Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And recently we put together like a SATs collection for the end of Year 6 thing that was quite popular. So yeah, we have. We don't, and I think that's something we're going to need to do to improve the kind of collections as a way of kind of curating the very best content. But yeah, we cater for all of primary.
Thank you. Okay. Right. Any last comments? Okay, go ahead, please, Estelle.
Just thinking about the tagging of ages, maybe we could tag to do with progression pathways. That might be an idea of getting around the age thing, possibly. Maybe with colours of bands or something instead.
I'd be reluctant to go down that route because there's more than just a sort of English focus to what we're doing here.
Okay. Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, if that's how people think of these things, it's certainly feedback which we've had in some of the question writing workshops as to particularly secondary school teachers using that as a way of structuring their curriculum, for whom this might well be very helpful.
I think progression pathways, certainly at a primary level, often are seen as not being particularly accessible, and I think it depends where the audience is.
Which is really why we went down the route of this relatively broad brushstroke taxonomy as to, well, this is a question about algorithms without sort of getting into much more detail as to which particular bit of algorithms that would fit into. But that's perhaps something which we need to come back to.
I was just going to add that around the quality of, the difficulty of questions. There is an element of that can be automated when we get enough answers from students on questions. And one of the big parts of this project is actually evaluating the quality of questions based on the answers from students. And part of that is looking at the kind of related difficulties. So there might be some automation that would update teachers' initial tags of papers.
We'll see some of that at the initial level of this is a question which lots of learners have got wrong, but once the team at Durham get on stream with analysing data in bulk, there's some amazing statistical techniques that they can bring to bear on that about, you know, a learner who typically finds these questions accessible finds this particular question quite challenging. That's really interesting territory. We are now at 9 o'clock, so unless anybody has something which they feel they really must say before we stop the broadcast, I'm going to stop the broadcast. Okay, thank you all ever so much. Do hang on in the room for a moment or two for a debrief.